Welcome. My name is Tyler Jones, and I serve as the president of the board. Florida CraftArt is a nonprofit statewide organization. Our mission is to grow the statewide creative economy by engaging the community and advancing Florida's fine craft artists and their work. Florida CraftArt is a member-supported organization. We are open 7 days a week and feature more than 250 artists in our gallery. We appreciate your attending our event tonight. You will be eligible to win one of two, that's right, two $20 gift cards that will be drawn at the end of the presentation. Make sure that you stay on the Zoom because you must be present to win. Our current exhibit, Epicurean Delights, will be on display through May 8th. The outstanding work of fine craft showcase the best in fine craft that is focused on dining. From glass blown so intricately it looks like an orange, to handcrafted and artistically designed wooden chairs, to food-themed jewelry. You're sure to delight in the show. In order to bring these quality exhibitions to community free of charge, we depend on sponsorships. And for Epicurean Delights, our main sponsor is Mark Anderson and Keith Bucklew, along with support from Perry and Lisa Everett and William Dean Chocolates. Thank you so much to our incredibly generous community sponsors. Speaking of chocolate, don't miss the chocolate tasting Zoom with Bill Brown, founder of William Dean Chocolates, on April 27th. You can purchase the chocolate samples at Florida CraftArt after April 15th. On April 20th, the curator of education at the Dolly Museum, Peter Tush, will tell us all about dining with Dolly and explore the Dolly Cookbook. To accompany each exhibition, we present fresh and interesting programming related to the theme of the show. We're pleased to welcome our speaker tonight, who was the food and travel editor of the Tampa Bay Times for 15 years. During that time, the taste section was honored several times by the Association of Food Journalists as the best in the nation in the large circulation category. She left the Times in 2015 to teach journalism and food writing at University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, and while there, earned a doctorate in education. She's reinvented herself again. In February, she joined the personal finance website, The Penny Hoarder, as its senior editor in charge of the freelance team, but she still collects recipe boxes. Please join me in welcoming Janet Keeler. Janet?
So I'm not sure totally. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. This is really a nice treat to get to talk about recipes and some other things that I'm going to talk to you about. And I can't really tell you like when my obsession with recipes started, because I didn't come from a home where there was a lot there was cooking, yes, by my mother, who cooked dinner every night of the week, but never really particularly liked to cook. And she was a fine cook, but it wasn't really her thing. So we didn't have like a lot of recipes floating around there. I'm a military brat, so we didn't necessarily live around grandparents. So I didn't get that experience that a lot of people have of cooking with their grandparents. But for some reason, I just was really I've always really liked recipes. I find them very interesting and comforting. When my mother-in-law died, I have to move this here, right? Yeah. When my mother-in-law died, nobody knew what to do with the recipes. Did anyone want them? And yet, I said, well, my God, I'm going to take them, because as you know, anybody who has family recipes, they mean a lot to a family, don't they? I mean, this photo here of all these 3x5 cards with the handwriting, I'm sure to many of you has a familiar feeling to it. So, when we look at recipes, when we think about recipes, think, what are they really? Is it sort of a paint by numbers outline or something? Is it a very strict idea of what you're going to get at the end after you make this recipe? Some of us need that, don't we? We need this very detailed list of ingredients and instructions, and we're disappointed, if what we think we're going to get out of that outline, doesn't really happen. When I was at the Times, we did a story once. It was actually quite fun. We had a colleague there, and some of the people that are on the talk tonight from the Times will remember a woman named Jan who made incredible chocolate chip cookies. And we were always like, how does she make these great chocolate chip cookies? Well, she swore she just used the Toll House, the recipe on the back of the Toll House chips, chocolate chips. So I said, let's do an experiment here. So we got about 5 or 6 of us. And everybody made those cookies. And we asked a woman from the Cooperative Extension to come in and taste the cookies and see if she could tell us why they were all so different when everyone swore they used that exact recipe. And what actually happened was she could very well tell what we did different. She said, bring in the wrappers from the butter and bring in your pans. And we were like, that sounds kind of crazy. So those of us who used a butter that had less fat in it, low fat butter, the cookies were cakier. Those of us who used dark pans, the cookies were crisper because the dark pans generated more heat. So in essence, our outline there, the exact same outline, the paint by numbers outline didn't really hold up because we each brought our own ideas of how those cookies should be made. So then our recipes, kind of a permission to create a masterpiece. I don't know about that. I think that can go good or bad, right? I think the people who are really good at just winging it and throwing everything to the wind become chefs. I think that's what they have some innate ability to know if you're going to do a substitution, what's going to be better, what's going to, what will work instead of something else. But many of us know people who throw things to the wind, don't they? The rules and the recipes. We don't like really to eat with them that much or eat with them because it usually doesn't turn out very well. For about, I think 9 years or so at the Times, we had an annual little program we called Wishbone U, and we gathered a bunch of self-proclaimed bad cooks and took them to the Aprons Cooking School over in Tampa, and they tried to teach us how to make Thanksgiving dinner. And some of those cooks were people were kind of amazing in the things that they did. Like many of them were saying, I can never make cookies. I can never make pies. I can never make cakes. It always turns out bad. And so when I was talking to them about them, one of them said, I said, well, what's the problem like when you follow the recipe? And she goes, well, I don't follow the recipe. And I said, oh, okay. So we'll start with the cookies. And she said, she goes, I don't understand why you have to do things separately. Why can't you throw everything into the mixer and mix it all up? And I thought, well, that's why your cookies don't turn out very well, because she didn't understand that there was some science behind that baking. So this idea of just kind of throwing things to the wind sometimes doesn't work out very well. The other thing is, for some of us, that recipe is just a way to get dinner on the table, isn't it? That's all. It's not really, not really trying to, create a masterpiece, maybe just trying to feed our families and make something that we know they'll eat. For those of you who are do a lot of cooking or do a lot of keeping up on recipes and trends in cookbooks, you'll recognize the sheet pan supper. That's been a trend for a few years now because, God knows we like to make things quick and easy. So if we can throw it all on a sheet pan and bake it, we're in good shape. So sometimes the recipe is just really that. It's just helping us figure out something to feed our families. It's also, to me, recipes have a lot of historical value. They tell us about things that happened in the past and the way people cooked and the way people lived. So Tony Tipton Martin wrote a book a few years ago called the Jemima Code. And in it, it's really almost like a catalog or an encyclopedia, 2 centuries of African-American cookbooks. And the thing that's so astounding about this book that she's put together, partially is because she collected these cookbooks herself. So she has a really unbelievable collection of historical cookbooks by African-American cooks and domestic workers and people who worked in the homes of white people. But the thing that's so fascinating about this is the first book that she found was from 1827. So think about that, 1827. how many years are you before the end of the Civil War, the abolition of slavery, and the prevailing thought, or what white people wanted everyone to think, was that African Americans, Black people, could not read or write. And so Toni in a very wonderful way shows that that's not true, even though lots of people know it's not true. But so she had these books that were written and published. So this one here is really an interesting one. And I think it was out in 1866. So just a year after the 13th Amendment was voted into law, the abolition of slavery. And this was from an experienced cook, it says Melinda Russell. And the recipes in here have not much of anything, a couple of sentences about how to put together the dishes, which makes you think, well, so were people good cooks or bad cooks? Or were they very, did they do a good job in the kitchen? I mean, I would maintain they did a really good job. Some of you look at your grandmothers, and I'm going to say mostly grandmothers, recipe cards, and they don't have a lot of instruction on them, do they? And you're going to recreate some dish that you remember, and grandma's not left you much instruction, has she? And you're thinking, geez, she was maybe not a very good cook. She didn't write anything down. But actually the reverse is true. She was a good cook, and she cooked by sight and smell and feel. So she knew when things were done. She knew when it was time to take something out of the oven. She didn't leave those hints for you because she didn't know we were going to need those so badly in the modern age, did she? So now, you think about food as art. So this is a collection of photographs from a show that's going on right now at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. And 9 artists were commissioned to create these tablescapes. And it's a virtual show and an interactive show. But the thing that I find so fascinating about it is that each of the tables that were created came from contributions from the community at large. They put out a call for people to send in recipes and send in memories and everything. And then artists took those and turned them into these tableaus. So that's going on now until December. It actually opened in January, I think. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. This is from a blogger who has several cookbooks out called The Forest Feast, vegetarian cookbooks. But she did this in about 2011, where she got artists to put together food photographs with recipes. So now you see another way that we can take these recipes, take this information about cooking and about ingredients and putting food together, and you can take it and make more art, an artistic representation out of it. I think that's really beautiful. That that idea of doing that is kind of a neat thing. So then you have something interesting going on now. I don't know if you know this cookbook by Sam Sifton from the New York Times. So if you think about the modern sort of, and by modern, I mean maybe, I don't know, 120 years old, the evolution of recipes. So Fannie Farmer in the late 1800s was a cooking school teacher in Boston, and she wrote the famous Boston Cooking School Cookbook, which became the Fannie Farmer Cookbook. Many of you probably have that in your collection, or at least have heard of it. So she was she was a big stickler on amounts. Like if you look at those old cookbooks, very old cookbooks, there is no amount. So, for a modern cook, it's really tough to recreate. So she was quite a stickler on making sure the amounts were in there. The legendary cookbook food writer, MFK Fisher, in the 1960s, she was very clear that recipes should be a list of ingredients and then the instructions, compared to this sort of in paragraph form, almost a narrative style of writing, which had been popular for a while. That's what was needed so that people could recreate these dishes and that the recipes were useful to them. So Sam Sifton from the New York Times comes out with this book just about a month ago called The No recipes. And if you read his work in the New York Times, he has a column. Actually, I'm thinking he might have ripped it off from me, because I did this column for 15 years in the Times called Stir Crazy, which was just a list of ideas of things you could make for dinner. Do you think he stole it from me? I don't think so. But anyway, here's a page out of the cookbook. So if you take a look at it, you notice right away, there's no amounts, isn't there? There's garlic, ginger, soy sauce, whatever. And it's a very, very detailed way of doing it, but he's kind of leaving it up to you to figure out how much to put in there. So there's been a lot of interesting commentary about this cookbook, and why, why was it done to kind of get people talking? And I think it has, at least in the cookbook world. He's very much kind of preaching to the choir, isn't he? Because if you can use this cookbook, you're probably a fairly decent cook. I think a lot of people would be kind of thrown off by that, but it's an interesting idea. And he's asking you maybe to, kind of cook by faith and go back to those roots of your grandparents, your grandmothers, their mothers, where they were able to cook by sense of feel, taste, look, smell, that kind of thing. So that's what he's asking you to do. So I think this is a very interesting cookbook. Someone who looked at it the other day said they really liked it because it really laid flat. That's the things that we love about cookbooks, right? That make it worth it to us. And then there's this on Etsy. Here's Karen Dom, who she says this item ships free to the United States. I'm guessing she's probably in Great Britain. But anyway, for $350, people were in the wrong business, I think. She'll take your one of your vintage recipe cards from a family member or a friend or something, and she'll turn it into, these I think are little greeting cards. So she takes them, and I mean, she'll do anything else with them too. I think make little posters or maybe even just kind of postcard things. So she takes the recipe and she makes it into this art. I thought that's pretty clever. $350. Go girl, right? I guess. And I don't know if she got some placement there from Domino Sugar, a little, product placement money, but that was kind of interesting. But what a clever thing. So there's somebody who has recognized the value and what those old recipes mean to us, and how we're going to save them. I don't know how much longer these little recipe boxes are going to survive, really, because of the way we cook and the way we save recipes. So many of us are getting recipes off the internet. Some of us still have a big collection of cookbooks. But a lot of us are getting recipes off the internet. They don't have quite the sexiness, do they, of grandma's handwritten notes, or the splatters or those kinds of things. So it's an interesting, the recipe card and the recipe box to me is a very interesting and narrow time frame. When all is said and done, that might be about 100 years. That's all. From like the early 1900s, to I don't know, to the early 2000s. And then who's doing that? Who's making these, these recipe boxes? So let me see if I can see this here. It's kind of hard to see down at the bottom there because of where my picture is. So this quote from Kim McKinney of Nashville: "I tell my daughters that when I go, they'll know the good recipes from the dirty pages." So that means, the splatters, right? The dark spots, the creases, everything else. So that quote about the dirty pages became an organization in Nashville called Dirty Pages. And they had a series of events. They've been kind of quiet in the last few years. Had a series of events where they got together women to talk about their recipes and to talk about what they meant to them. I'm sure many of you listening tonight will have some of the same thoughts and feelings I have about these old recipes, because you remember your grandmother's cards or somebody's cards that were important to you. But I love that idea, right? By the dirty pages. Some people like to write all over their cookbooks, what worked, what didn't. Some people feel that's kind of sacrilege. You don't write in books. There's things you can buy that you can put your cookbooks or your recipe cards. You can put them kind of behind plexiglass so they don't get splatters on them. Well, I think that's a shame, right? I want to see splatters. I want to see if this is any good. I want to know if I'm going to save it and look at it from years and years. So I hope you'll indulge me a little bit. I want to talk about my friend Karen's recipe box. So, like I said, you all will have stories of people that you love and recipes that you've held on to, or what recipes that you wish you've held on to, or what happened to that recipe box. So Karen was my colleague and friend for a long time at the Times. And in fact, she was my first friend when I moved here in 1992. And I don't know how we fell into all this cooking, but we did. She was a fantastic cook. And in fact, at one point we sort of hatched this plan to junk our jobs at the Times, and we were going to start a catering business. It was called, we even had a name for it, and we made cards, silly cards. We called ourselves the Main Dish Tarts. And we did a couple of jobs, and then we gave it up because we realized in our mid-30s it was just too hard to haul all that stuff around and do all that. But we had a great time doing it. And Karen was a great, great, great baker. And I think about 13 years, well, maybe 15 years, 14 years, we had an annual Christmas cookie section at the Times, and readers would send in recipes, Christmas cookie recipes, and we would test them, and we would run a couple dozen of them. Well, Karen became the chief Christmas cookie baker. She tested all the recipes. She made them in her home kitchen. The first year or so, we relied on different people in the newsroom because I thought that would be kind of a cool idea for just regular people to take these recipes and bake them, and we'd see how they turn out. But then sometimes they would bring them back and say the recipe wasn't very good. And I would look at them and I thought, well, right, because the cookies are burned. So I knew I could depend on Karen, and I could. And she did a fantastic job with it. It was a lot of hard work to do that. And she also, she would bring the cookies in for me to test, and I would take a bite, and then I would throw the cookie in the trash can. And the first few times I did that, I swear she was going to start crying. She was just like, was it really bad? And I said, no, but when you test a lot of cookies, you just don't eat all of them. So she always was so horrified at that. And she loved to tell that story, how I did that to her. So unfortunately, Karen died very unexpectedly in February. And so it's not been very long, maybe just a couple months. And some of us have gone to her house and been able to take some things that were special to us. And I got her recipe box, which is really more like a recipe shoebox. It's not exactly a shoebox, but it's kind of that size. It has a lot of recipes in it. And I was really happy to have that box, because there's so much in it, in her handwriting, for one. And I know she was such a great cook that there's nothing in this box that she hadn't made. Some of us keep those, you cut something out and you stick it in the recipe box and you never make it. I have a lot of those kinds of things. But everything in this box is very carefully curated. It had to be good and to make it into the box. So it's been so much fun, and bittersweet, of course, looking through the recipes. And here we have her mom, Karen's last name is Prslopski, so her background is Polish. And I love these recipes because they're so much like your grandmother's recipes. They were for her. They weren't for me. They weren't for anybody else, really. They were for her to be able to know how to recreate these dishes. So they have very much her flavor and her hand in them. I should have taken a picture of this, but she was a mad woman about muffins. This recipe box has 12 recipes for muffins in them. And I have another thing I took from the house, and it's about a 35, almost 40-year-old little cookbook on muffins. She was always like wild to find the best muffin recipe. So I have a feeling if I ever am going to sit down and make muffins, I know I'll be okay with, I'll find one from her, thank God. At work, she used to keep, when she would bring muffins from home, she used to keep them on top of her computer. We'd have big computers in those days, not, little laptops and stuff, and they had big tops on them, but it was always warm. So she would always keep the muffins warm up there. So if you wanted a warm muffin, you knew you could always kind of go over to Karen's desk and you could find one. She would not like me to tell you this story, but it's very true. We used to go a long time ago. So my son's 26, so he was about a year old. So, 25 years ago, we'd go to Sweet Tomatoes, and she would be one of those people that would bring that Ziploc bag and put those little mini blueberry muffins in it. We would just collect them all so she could take them home because she was that crazy about muffins. So I look at this collection of recipes in a way different, I think, than some other people would. And specifically, of course, that because they're hers, and she was a dear friend, but they so much tell the story of a life, these kinds of things, recipes. And I don't know if you consider that exactly art, it's the art of living and the art of creating, but they so much tell the story of her life, about what she liked to do, what was important to her, who was important to her. I can go through here and I can hear her voice talking about her Aunt Pat, who I never met, but I know that she was a good cook, and I see Aunt Pat's recipes for things. It's just a really, it's a beautiful way to remember somebody and to think about what was important to them, what they shared with you. And when you're a cook, you share a lot with people. This is kind of, so Karen was married in her kitchen, in her small kitchen, because the man she married was also a great cook, and they loved to cook together. And so she was married in her kitchen, and I found this when I went through her cookbook. The only thing, a couple of us said, well, we'll cater, it was in her house, cater. I use the term loosely. We'll bring stuff for people to eat. And she said, the only thing I want is this beer dip that Janet makes, which is this really, disgustingly silly recipe, but everybody seems to like it. And I love the fact that this appeared in the Times. And I have said here that I like to use Rolling Rock beer. So that made it kind of, Royale, I guess. I don't know. That made it special, right? That was kind of funny that I had to put that in there. But anyway, so she's cut that out and taped it on a little card. But if you notice at the bottom, it says, Janet made this for our wedding party. I ate so much I threw up. Nice. Which is so her, and I could hear her voice, and I remember she did have to lay down. I was like, don't eat too much of that. It's awful. So that was such a gem to find that in the box. I didn't know that was going to be there. The other thing that she wanted to do, I'll just share this, is that she didn't want to carry a traditional bouquet. She wanted to carry like a big thing of basil and thyme and herbs, and we did kind of talk her out of that, but I thought that was kind of fun. So then this is my last one I'll share. So when you talk about dirty pages, this is also from Karen's recipe box. But when I look at it, it has this kind of feeling, if you sort of looked at it as a piece of art, clearly it was much loved and much used. But it almost has like a hieroglyphics feel to it, right? She's, done this, these things are coming over here with the arrow and beat them together. And then you've got to know that the pointer going down there, sit those together, then add, and then she's got the arrow up to add that all together. Again, this was not for us to really recreate. This was really more for her to remember how she made it. And I don't think this came from anybody. She doesn't have on here that it did. But I think this is so, to me, has her hand in it, her heart in it. And that's the thing that I think, for old recipes, even if they're from people that you don't know, clearly, you know, when it comes from someone you know, that means a lot. But I do like to look at anybody's old recipes because there's a familiarity and then there's a story about them. So that's kind of my love affair there with recipes. Now, the future of recipes, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've already said that I don't know how many more, how many people are doing these kinds of things, you know, on little 3x5 cards in a little wooden box or shoe box or whatever. You know, the printout, if you're printing things out, if you're even doing that, because you can read them on your phone in the kitchen. Remember, there was a day when you weren't going to bring that iPad or that your phone into the kitchen. My God, what could happen to it? Now you're like, well, who cares? You know, you stick in your finger, you know, your fingers with dirty stuff on them and everything because you're trying to get back to the recipe that's disappeared. Somehow that all works. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to them. And if you're a social media person and you look at things like TikTok, which now have these 60-second videos that show you how to make things, you know, is that kind of the new art form of recipes? So it's an interesting, it's interesting to kind of peer into the future and wonder how we'll save this and how we'll, you know, figure out how people cooked. And that's one of the things that I really like about, you know, the recipes is how much they tell us about a certain time. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe people have some questions or want to share some stories, because I know a lot of people do have their own stories about recipe boxes. So thank you very much.
Do we have any questions or any comments?
One of the main reasons that I wanted to do this, whether other than to support everything that goes on in our gallery, was to hear this wonderful, I knew you were going to do it like this, Janet, and I don't even know you. I knew it was going to be special like this. But timing wise, last week, I posted about a recipe. First of all, you should know I'm a horrible cook. I'm an incredible baker, and I love muffins like your friends. So I'm so sorry for your loss. But I used to have to cook or my kids would have died. So it was not a pleasant part of my life. And I had to do it every day. So when I ate something at someone's home and it moved me, or, you know, was life-changing, which happened several times, I would beg for a recipe. And long story short, I was pregnant with my daughter 40 years ago, and I ate this fettuccine Alfredo. And I started crying, and I'm like, I don't care what it takes. You have to share this with me. And she's like, she took me aside, and her daughter was getting married that weekend, one of my best friends. And she said, I can't share it with you because my 3 children have begged me for it and I haven't given it to them. And I'm like, I know, but I'm pregnant and I need this. And she said, I will share it with you, but you have to promise me that while I'm alive, you will never let my children have this. And I did not care what that meant or why. I didn't. I said, okay, okay. So last week, I know what it was, why I talked about the recipe. My friend Kim's mother, would have been her birthday. So she posted a picture, and, you know, that fettuccine Alfredo is the #1 recipe in my family. And I could never give it to them because she was alive. And so I told the story that I'm telling you now, and she PM'd me and said, I promise I won't tell my sister and my brother, but I need this. And I said, of course, your mom's not here anymore. And I kept my promise. And I sent her, I went to my light box and took professional pictures, front and back, covered in goosebumps. And she texted me and said, I'm sobbing happy tears because my mom's handwriting is on here, along with the fact that she typed it for you. The Kitchen at Pat Hardy, and it has a little watercolor, and you had a recipe in one of your pictures, and I was just so lumpy here. So I just wanted to share that I totally get it. I get why you love this, and this was just in the last week that this happened.
A beautiful story. I thought for sure you were going to say she took you aside and said it's actually store-bought, but I thought she was going to. The thing that's so neat about that and so interesting about that is often when we get those recipes that have meant so much to us and we try to make them at home or in our own kitchens, they never usually have quite the same taste, shine, feeling, and everything, because it was sometimes that person that made it so special, or their excitement for it. I mean, I will say, I like a blueberry muffin, that's fine. But when I think of how much Karen loved those kinds of things, it makes you love them even more because it was so special. And then there's a bit of a quest to it, isn't there? When you're trying to find the best recipe for this or try to really recreate that. But sometimes it's hard because the person isn't there. And that's the memory of it, the lasting effect of some of these recipes, and sometimes when you look at them, you're like, oh my gosh, not so much the muffins, but a lot of them, that's too hard. I didn't want to do all that. So where's grandma?
So we have a question, Claire, you want to unmute yourself?
Claire.
I just, Janet, that was wonderful. And Janet put such a lovely spin on why sometimes when you inherit a recipe from a beloved family member or friend and you try to make it, it doesn't turn out quite right. It's just because they're gone. But sometimes I think they're deliberately leaving stuff out. And I'll tell you, my great grandmother Hazel's fudge is legendary in our family at holiday time. I mean, we would just, she'd put like 6 little pieces in a little can and you were delighted at Christmas to get it. And my grandmother got her mother's recipe and I tried to make it. And it would never turn out right. And finally I said to my grandmother, who I call Shirley, I said, Shirley, I was like 30 and I was like, I'm going to watch you do it. And I'm going to do exactly what you do. I thought there was some technique that I was missing. And I watched her, and like about halfway through, she puts in 4 big tablespoons of cocoa powder, which is not in the recipe at all. And I'm like, old woman, you're holding out on me. I can't make this if you don't tell me what's in it. But I've had that same experience when, and this is my question for Janet, when I go to a restaurant that I love and I have a dish I love, I often will buy the restaurant's cookbook if they have one. That's kind of the way I've built kind of a collection of great restaurant cookbooks. And often they don't turn out right. And I'm a pretty good home cook. I'm not a professional by any means, but over and over again, they are disappointing. And I wonder, do you think that's a result? I mean, is it just scaling something down from a restaurant quantity to a home cooked quantity? You're just going to miss something, or something's just not going to work quite the same way, or I just don't have the right equipment to really recreate it. Or my more sinister theory is that they want you to have to come back to the restaurant and buy their dish. So I'll shut up and let you talk. Thanks.
Nice. That's a nice question, Claire. Thank you. I think there could be a couple things at play here. I will say my experience with restaurant chefs when I was at the Times, sometimes we would like to run recipes, get a local chef to create something or, share a recipe and stuff, but they're not used to cooking. They're not used to cooking for home cooks. They're not used to cooking in quantities that feed 6 to 8 or 4 or something like that. So that was always kind of problematic. Now in a cookbook, they should have somebody who's doing that for them, that the chef is not really having to scale that. But I think that can be kind of an issue sometimes because of what happens in that restaurant kitchen is sometimes hard to completely recreate for the reasons you've said. As far as not so much leaving stuff out, but I do find a lot of restaurants hesitant to do cookbooks because they're afraid of giving away those recipes that people won't come to the restaurant, which I think is probably not true, but I can understand that they feel that way. So there may be, okay, we're going to take our recipe for, veal Parmesan and we're going to change it slightly because, we don't want people to get that taste of it. So they never come back. So I don't know if it's so much, there's a million recipes for, eggplant Parmesan or something like that. So I think sometimes it has to do with that they're tweaking it a little bit because in their hearts, they don't really want to give it away. But I don't think they want you to have a failure at home. I don't really think that. They're not quite that, sinister. But I think it's both those things that you pointed out. And sometimes I do think that experience of eating this meal at a restaurant is so fun or so special that you do it at home and you're like, oh, it's just eggplant Parmesan, you know, it was kind of a lot of work and kind of messy. And, you know, it's nice when someone else does the dishes and serves it for you. So anyway.
Okay, Dahlia Colon would like to ask a question, and then Francine Wolf, I think.
Hey,
Hey
Delia.
Janet, how's
Hey.
it going? I've been making dinner the whole time and I feel so inspired now having
You
listened to this
making?
conversation. I'm making Allison Roman's beans and greens, one of her stews, you know, she's got that magic. It's like,
Well, you have 2 little kids, so beans and greens, good for you, huh?
well, I didn't say they were eating that. That's for me and my husband, but you know, goals. My son will eat anything off my plate. But my question is, besides the $350 poster, what are some other ideas for either preserving family recipes or giving them as gifts? Maybe like a family cookbook, or just another way to get them into the hands of more people.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart thing to think about, because, you know, if there's just one recipe box and it's mine, I don't want to share it with anybody, right? But I have, you know, cousins or siblings or whatever, or kids that want them. So I think that idea of doing a family cookbook is really good, especially if you can kind of scan in or get those recipes so they can see them rather than you know, and then type them out, kind of like that woman did on that art. I think that's kind of a clever idea. But I think for sure, cookbooks. I wonder too if you could actually have them scanned in and printed. If you could have them on aprons or something like that. You know, maybe you could make them into some kind of linen stuff or cloths or something.
I have seen tea towels on Etsy, so that's a good idea.
Yeah, something like that. But I guess it depends on if you are hoping somebody's going to use them. I mean, we've been thinking about that with family photographs. Like, you know, my poor son is going to have, like, you know, oodles and oodles of photos that he's going to have to go through, and, you know, which he probably won't. I mean, should we take some out and say, this is who this is, you know, that old thing about writing on the back of photos and stuff. But I think that the idea of a family cookbook is a really nice one. And there's so many there's a ton of platforms and programs out there where you know, scan them in, drag and drop, and that whole thing. You don't have to start from scratch.
That's a great question. If I could jump in real quick, Dahlia, thank you for the question. And Janet, really good suggestion. Another suggestion to incorporate our artistic community is to possibly commission an artist, not to shamelessly plug Kimberly Cummings, but the soup tureen that you love behind you, I have seen her write on a number of things. And so she could actually create pieces of artwork, pottery that would be serving dishes that would have the recipe on it, or plaques or something that could be given as gifts. So
Yeah, that's a really nice idea.
Francine, you're up next, and then we've got Lynn.
Okay. Well, Janet, thank you for, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. Once again, I could listen to you for hours, talk about everything you know, because you're so wonderful.
Dear Francine, really.
Well, not like hours at a time. But speaking of family recipes, my grandmother used to make, I mean, she baked and she cooked and she made, you know, the old Eastern European dishes, never wrote anything down. So when my mother passed, my daughter took her recipe box. None of my grandmother's recipes were in there either. So I don't know if you knew this, but I based my one-woman show that I toured with a couple of years ago, Half Baked Boomer, on a recipe on baking my grandmother's big chocolate sheet cake that she never put frosting on for a family reunion. And I had a recipe box on stage, and I found really pretty recipe cards because I knew that the audience was going to see them. And I know I got them from one of the estate sales with the old recipes that I gave you. But speaking of, will recipe cards and boxes still continue? I've only seen Hallmark make them because they used to be able to find them everywhere. No, you can't find them anywhere. You really can't.
I have a feeling that, you know, and I didn't look for that. That's a good question, but I'm sure that you can find some digitally. I'm sure there's probably some ways you could find them digitally and print them out, and, you know, rather than the actual, you know, 3x5 cards that you buy. You know, my friend Karen, she has in her recipe box, she loved to use little stamps. So she has a really cute little stamp of like a like kind of a vintagey kitchen and a lady cooking at this old stove. And she used to just get the blank 3x5s and stamp it and make her own. So she had her own. But I think it's maybe a little bit of a lost art, but it would be kind of a fun art class actually to create those. I think that would be kind of neat, but I think you can probably do them digitally. So I have to tell you a story about Francine. So she mentioned estate sales. So she's a woman of many talents, and she does antiquing and selling vintage things. So she asked me if I was interested. I think we were talking about recipe boxes, and I said I really liked them. So she found some for me, and she brought them to me, and I opened them up and I go, "Where are the recipes?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" I go, "I only want them if they're full of recipes, not just the boxes." So she's always on the hunt for. So I have a lot of recipe boxes that she's rescued for me. And I always feel kind of bad for the people whose recipes got abandoned. I thought, who didn't want their recipes? But anyway, so that would be my guess, is that you could probably find some cool digital programs to do that.
Thank you, Janet. I think your lecture was absolutely brilliant. I really appreciate it. I wanted to show you what I've been doing for my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren during this pandemic year. I took all of the recipes from those old cards and cookbooks with many stains on certain pages of recipes I've adapted. And I put together Grandma Lynn's Family and Friends Cookbook of Vegetarian Recipes. Let me show you what I've done. Each section is divided with a list of what's in the section. And my particular method of adding to this is to keep the recipes that I find attractive in different sections. I'm a soup specialist, and so the soup section is the largest, but I was able to put together certain menus that were favorites of the family, and I also did an index. So I encourage everyone to do this. Don't wait for the pandemic. It was a lot of fun, and my children just adore having this.
Thanks, Lynn. That's great.
Stacia Schrader has a question. So Stacia, you just need to unmute. There you
Very
go.
good. Yes. What a wonderful talk. It's really apropos for my family. My sister is in town after getting vaccinated. She retired last year, and she and her husband were stranded in the house, and they came down from Columbus, and this is their first trip. And before she retired, I'm from a big ethnic family, Syrian Lebanese, no recipes with tablespoons and everything. It's just people would fight about who made the best salad and throw in the pepper juice, and it was always homemade pepper juice. So it was always different, but the men would get in and fight and, elbow each other out. And we had good Middle Eastern flavors that we would throw together. And she had a wonderful granola that my grandmother made, and she would never let anybody in. It was just sort of what she had in her kitchen. And so my sister, knowing that retirement was coming in, she started a little business, and she calls it Tillys Kitchen. That's the name of her granola. She's packaged it now and done a wonderful little art label, went through the Department of Health to make sure that she could sell it, works out of a co-op kitchen, and that's her retirement plan. She goes to the weekend markets and sells it, but it's really about that family, wonderful connection. The artwork is about the history of what recipes bring to our families. And it's just a way that my whole family loves it. At Christmas time, we get them. She's found her, she's shipping it to me for people that love her granola. And, it's just a wonderful way to keep it going. But what a wonderful event tonight. I truly appreciated it. It is another artistic way to express yourself, especially with, the art of food as well as the art of the recipe cards. I hope we don't lose them. And I absolutely love, and will always tell my sister, we have to keep the dirtiest recipe cards, because that is the best.
Those are the best ones. Those are the ones that are well loved, right? The ones that have no marks on them. You're like, well, this must not have been very good. No one ever used this one. That's interesting that she's doing that in retirement, because my God, that's a lot of work. you know, going to one of those, you know, the community, the co-op kitchens, and then
Yes.
hauling that stuff to the market. So that's, you know, that's a lot
Exactly.
of work. That's a neat thing. Labor of
There's a lot
love.
of love for those family recipes to
Yeah.
share it. That's what
That's
it
great.
stems from. You're right.
I mean, a lot of people have things that they make that people really like, and they're saying, "Oh, you know, you ought to bottle this. You ought to, you know, make this salsa." And then they try it, and then they realize that's a lot of work, you know, to really actually, you know, it's one thing to can a few jars and give them away for Christmas. It's another thing to, you know, try to get on the shelves of Publix. Right?
Exactly.
So
Right.
my mother was a wonderful cook. And when my children were born, she made recipes that she typed out and made some recipe books and just a binder for them. But and she had a tremendous collection of cookbooks. She passed at 96, and I'm really not much of a cook. It hasn't been my big interest, but so I gave them to Jan Norris. And so Jan, would you like to say something? Would you like to say hello? Or Jan, as I said, was the former food editor at the Palm Beach Post, and we were colleagues. We worked together.
Right, right. And I appreciate the books. One of the funny stories I have, I love the cookbooks, and I collect the cookbooks, but they got out of hand. So I'm with you. I do recipe boxes, and in all my vintage stuff, tons of recipe boxes. But like Francine, I've got a lot of empty ones as well, because I think they're cute. You know, I just love the artwork on them. One of our colleagues, Karen Harem from San Antonio, the food editor there, collected those boxes. And she knew I collected buttons. That's my big thing. So we trade. I buy her boxes and she buys me buttons. But anyway, my funny story about recipes. First of all, you were talking about making sure that you pass these recipes on. And every year at Thanksgiving, I would include, pardon me, in my column, a plea for families. At Thanksgiving, there are more recipes brought out than any other time of year. Any other time of year, I promise you. Everybody in America cooks Thanksgiving dinner or goes to one. That's it. It's the biggest cooking day in the United States. So I tell everyone, that's the day to pull out all those recipes, put on the copier, and at least pass those suckers around and get them continued. You know, continue your family history right there on the plate, kind of thing. And it's that time of year to do it. It's the best time. Anyway, my claim to fame is a Christmas cookie called the Orange Drop Cookie. It's just a simple sour cream based fluffy cakey cookie. It's delicious, and it has it's made with orange juice and tons of orange zest for the cookie. And then for the icing, it's maraschino cherries in just a simple buttercream. And it's killer delicious. It's got almond extract in it, and it is to die for. So I got this recipe from my next door neighbors growing up. They were from Michigan. We were the only Southern family on the block. So we were the only people on earth who ate black-eyed peas and things like that, and every fried vegetable known to man. So anyway, they were the bakers. My mother never baked a lick in her life except at Christmas to make her famous Lane cake. That was it. I was the baker of the house because I thought baking was way cool. So I appropriated this recipe. I love that recipe so much when they made it that I got this recipe from them. And it was always called Grandma Smiggin's Orange Drop Cookies. And I thought this was the coolest thing. You know, they've got their family recipe. They handed it down and on and on and on. And I lost track of them for years, hadn't talked to them in a long time, and was going through the Betty Crocker cookbook. Lo and behold, here is Grandma Smiggin's Orange Drop Cookie recipe. So what we know in these boxes, they may be in your grandma's hand, and they may be called Grandma Smiggin's Orange Drop Cookie recipe, but there are times when those cookies have been appropriated elsewhere, kind of thing. So I had to go back. I had printed this in the Palm Beach Post and called it Grandma Smiggins, orange drop recipe. Now there's a caveat at the bottom that says, it's Betty Crocker.
Well, that's a great
There's
story,
a-
Jen.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, right? Who's, grandma's,
They didn't add it.
Yeah,
There
we
was
used to think in
no
our house,
bottom, right.
yeah, that my Oma, my German grandmother, that she invented split pea soup. And we were shocked when we found out it was actually, a thing that other people did, that she did not invent that. Not that she said she did, but she was the one who made it. So I think that happens a lot with recipes. You can't copyright a recipe. You can copyright a cookbook, or but not a specific recipe. So they're kind of up for grabs, aren't they? Betty Crocker probably got it from someone else too.
I think so too, don't you? We know she didn't come up with all of those suckers.
Right.
Well, thank you all so much. And Janet, that was a wonderful, very interesting, fascinating talk. And you went to a lot of effort to do it, and we so appreciate it. And we hope that all of you will come in to see our wonderful exhibit. I chose this photograph to show you because it has all sorts of different fine craft, from fiber, wood, a marionette made out of recycled materials, and mosaic. So but that's just part of the exhibit. It's really quite fascinating. And I want to thank our sponsors again. We appreciate it. It really helps out because the exhibits are expensive to launch and to prepare. And we also appreciate that the City of St. Petersburg and Culture Builds Florida, the Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, give us a grant every year. So if you know anyone who would be interested in sponsoring any of our exhibitions, we have some very interesting ones, and you can see if any of you are artists on the calls to artists on our website. So now we're going to have the drawing for 2 $20 gift cards, and I'm going to turn that over to Liz Rogers, who is our gallery manager. Liz Cooper's.
It's okay. This month is actually our 6-month anniversary. It's crazy time. Time flies. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Real quick before I say the winners, I wanted to say that recipes live on in recipe books. I'm in my 30s and I still have all my grandma's recipes, and I send these blank ones out to my friends and family and make them fill them out for me. So it doesn't just live on Pinterest, because you have to be careful. Sometimes they delete the website and the recipe you love is gone forever.
Right.
So write them down, and you can find recipe cards at lots of artist websites. Trust me, I've bought them. So let's keep the recipe tradition going on. And anyone wants to send me recipes, I'm always taking them. So just send them to Florida CraftArt. I'll cook them.
Well, you can just bring them in to Florida CraftArt
and shop around. Exactly. Okay, so our first winner is Claire Brantley.
Oh.
Claire, yay, she's still on the call.
Yes, she is.
I'm right here, yay!
Claire, you can just give a call to the gallery tomorrow so we can get your information for your gift card.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks.
And then, or you could just come in and we'll give it to you. Either way,
Bring
let
a
us
recipe.
know.
Make sure
I
you
vote for her coming in.
Come in, bring a recipe.
You have
I'll
to
take
come in
it.
to get the gift card anyway. So
Exactly. And our second winner is, I'm hoping I'm saying this correct, Dahlia Cologne.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you.
Yay! She's still on here. I love Allison Roman too. I'm so excited that you're cooking her right now.
Anything that she touches just turns to gold. Even when you look at the ingredients and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Somehow it's good.
Oh my
Thank you
God.
so much. I'm so excited.
Allison Roman's the best.
Thanks again, Janet. Thank you, Tyler.
thank you.
For emceeing. And
Janet, thank you.
everybody who attended, my staff, Janie and Liz, we appreciate it. And all of our board members who attended. Thanks so much, and we'll hope to see you here soon.
Thanks, everybody, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Janet. Wonderfully
Thanks,
rich evening.
Janet.
Thanks.